Biden's official pardon for his son Hunter, who was facing sentencing and probably prison for 2 criminal offences. He has 2 felony convictions and pleaded guilty to 9 federal tax charges in Los Angeles in September. The crime essentially is falsifying records and failing to file returns during a period when he was, it is known, hooked on crack alcohol and easy cash, none of which mitigates or excuses what he has done. I find this fascinating. I broke one of my new rules this morning on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform I now favour. You can follow me there at Mr. James OB, and I kind of waded in with a strong opinion when perhaps I hadn't given it as much thought as I should have done. It wasn't particularly pungent, but I may also have been doing that anti-footballification thing that we talked about on Friday with regard to Louise Haig, where you're so conscious of wanting to be better than the people that you condemn that you end up almost not being authentic or true to yourself when attacking the people that you think are on the same side as you. So my initial thought about this, before I'd read Joe Biden's statement, was, oh, for goodness sake, what a gift you've given to Donald Trump. My second thought, because now all Donald Trump supporters can pretend that him excusing and pardoning all manner of miscreants and criminals is akin to Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter, and I'm afraid that there is a kernel of truth in those comparisons. But Donald Trump doesn't need any encouragement or precedent to behave with utter depravity and criminality and unaccountability, as we know. So then my second thought was that Joe Biden has delivered a massive screw you to his own party. I don't think he was happy about the nature in which he left office. I think he wanted to fight the last election. In his own mind, he may still believe that he would have had a better chance of winning it than Kamala Harris. So that the second bit of the pungent opinion then becomes, this is really just a big attack on his own party and the idea that he doesn't feel that the respect is sufficiently reciprocated for him to have acted in the best interests of the party. Whether they deserve to be treated like that or not, I rather pompously opined at 8 o'clock this morning, is the biggest casualty here is decency.
Biden's decision to issue a blanket pardon for his son Hunter, a reversal from promises he made during the campaign. Chief White House correspondent Mary Bruce starts us off. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning, George. Well, this is something that President Biden and this White House were adamant that he would not do. But this morning, with just weeks left in office, the president is now protecting his only living son with a sweeping pardon. Overnight, a sudden reversal. President Biden issuing a full and unconditional pardon of his son Hunter, ending a legal saga that the president now says was politically motivated. Biden had long promised he would not interfere with his son's cases, telling our David Muir in June such a pardon was not an option.
Will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
But now Biden says he believes his son was selectively and unfairly prosecuted, writing in a statement, no reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he is my son, and that is wrong. The president accusing his political opponents of trying to break Hunter, who has been sober now for over 5 years, saying in trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough.
I'm extremely proud of my son Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know.
Hunter Biden was convicted in June on federal gun charges for lying on a federal form about his drug addiction when he bought this Colt revolver in 2018. And in September, he pleaded guilty in a last-minute deal to 9 tax-related charges, accused of avoiding paying $1.4 million in taxes while living lavishly, taxes he had since paid back. He was scheduled to be sentenced later this month in each case, potentially facing more than a decade in prison. But now Hunter, seen with his father over this past holiday weekend, will face none of that. The president's pardon is sweeping, covering not just those charges, but any uncharged crimes between 2014 and 2024. For months, the president intentionally avoided commenting on the specifics of his son's cases, not wanting to give the appearance of interfering, instead stressing his support for Hunter as a father.
I love him, and he's on the straight and narrow, and he has been for a couple of years now, and I'm just so proud of him.
While at the White House, aides were emphatic that the president would not step in on his son's behalf.
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
But now the president says, here's the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process, and it led to a miscarriage of justice. Adding, I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. The about-face comes just weeks before President-elect Donald Trump is set to take office. Trump has vowed retribution against his political opponents and has repeatedly bashed Hunter and the Biden family, accusing them without evidence of corruption. President Biden clearly did not want to leave his son's fate in the hands of Trump's Justice Department. Now, in a statement and a post, Trump says the pardon is the abuse and miscarriage of justice here, while in a statement, his spokesman argues the president's move underscores Trump's claims that the Justice Department has been weaponized, saying, quote, that must be fixed, and saying that is what Trump intends to do when he returns to the White House. George.
Okay, Mary, thanks. Let's bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. We saw the president's words there, called it a miscarriage of justice, said Hunter was selectively and unfairly prosecuted. From a legal perspective, is that a good argument?
He has an argument, but he certainly has an argument with regard to the gun charge, right? There has never been another federal charge of someone charged under this set of facts, meaning the gun wasn't used in more than one crime, the person had no criminal record, the gun wasn't used in a crime. I mean,
so that's the definition of selective prosecution.
Correct. You can definitely argue with regard to the gun charge. Now, the issue is that the gun charge got tacked on in connection with the plea agreement that initially happened and fell through. The tax cases is a little tougher. Yes, it's true that in a lot of cases, when someone doesn't pay their taxes, they're allowed to pay them back. And at worst, they just get a fine. It's also true that in certain cases, people get prosecuted for not paying their taxes. So it's a little squishier with regard to the tax charge as to whether this was clearly selective prosecution.
How about the idea this was a blanket pardon, protecting his son for anything that might have happened since 2014?
Well, look, that is certainly as sweeping as you can make it. And there is an argument that he could have done something much more limited, meaning called granting him clemency. That would have meant the convictions stand, but with regard to a sentence, he doesn't get any jail time. There is no sentence. That's what clemency could have done. He didn't do that. He granted him pardon on the two charges, plus on anything he could conceivably prosecuted for.
Out of fear that he might be prosecuted.
Well,
by
because there are a lot of people on the right in particular who have been talking about a variety of crimes that they wish that Hunter Biden had been charged with, that he should have been charged with, etc. And I think that's the reason that one happened. But it's interesting when you hear the president's team, the president-elect's team, talk about the Department of Justice and weaponization. It's a little tough to say that because this Department of Justice is the department that went after Hunter Biden. So it's now the president stepping in to protect Hunter Biden from his Department of Justice. And I think it's an important point to remember in this context.
It is. Dan Abrams, thanks very much.
All right, let's go to the United States. Major news there today. President Joe Biden pardoning his son Hunter, who was facing possible jail time over the gun and tax charges. In a statement, the president said the charges in his cases came about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. No reasonable person, he says, who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any conclusion other than he was singled out only because he's my son, and that is wrong. Joining me now to discuss this and more, LNP MP Keith Pearce and Liberal Senator for South Australia, Alex Antic. Well, Alex, he said he would never do this, and then he did. Do you think this will be the end of it?
Well, Peter, I mean, I think I heard him say that, but I never really believed it, honestly. I mean, it's extraordinary to me that this power even exists in the United States. I'm glad we don't have the same thing here because seems on a starting point to sort of fundamentally cut across the separation of powers and seems entirely conflicted. But look, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt it was ever going to happen. And I have to say, it is extraordinary to hear the president say that he thinks that Hunter's been singled out. I mean, ask the 45th president of the United States, Donald John Trump, how he feels about having more indictments than Alphonse Capone, and see if he feels singled out. So, look, I don't know. I don't think this is the end of it, though. I think there'll be more to it, although this covers a 10-year period, apparently, from January 1, 2014 to 10 years ahead of that. So it's extraordinary stuff.
Yeah, they have to do it. He has to do it because otherwise his legacy, of course, is going to be tainted by his son, who is as rotten as all get out. But Keith, just more broadly on the incoming president's first couple of weeks, I mean, some of these appointments, geez, are going to shake the tree in Washington.
Absolutely, Peter, and I agree with Alex. It's quite extraordinary not having the separation of powers. I just went to have a bit of a look. Would you believe Obama pardoned almost 2,000 people, Donald Trump in his last term a couple hundred, and Joe Biden just 26, and one happens to be his son. I mean, what an incredible power to have. But I think Donald Trump, the US people have made the right decision. I think this is just another justification for his election. And his selections have been broad, and you've got Matt Whitaker, who I know very well. He'll be the ambassador to NATO, and I think that will definitely help sort out the issue in Ukraine. And I look forward to more strong decisions from Donald Trump in the United States.
Alex, what do you make about the decision today by Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke to refuse an Australian visa to a former Israeli government minister, Ayelet Shaked?
Yeah, well, Peter, I mean, this is becoming all too familiar, isn't it? We have this sort of strange path where people are singled out for reasons of social cohesion. I mean, I think a similar power was used, if not the exact same power, without being corrected, for Novak Djokovic and Candace Owens. Novak Djokovic, of course, came through the middle of COVID, and you can see how this power can be used in terms of the minister's own subjective opinion in many respects as to what is going to harm society. Now, I mean, I take the view, I would rather hear what people have got to say, regardless of whether or not I'm offended by it or not. I just think this is a very, very dangerous way to go. And so I think, freedom of speech is finite. I get it. You can't have people calling for, killings and murders and all the rest of it. We all agree with that. But you start entering into dangerous territory when you start denying people visas on these grounds, I reckon.
Look, I share that view. Let's go to Queensland, up your way. Homestyle Bake, Keith, has warned that manufacturing in this country is being priced out of existence. This is a business that now pays 200% more for gas and around 300% more for electricity than it did just 3 years ago. It comes as South Australia scrambles to restart 2 diesel power plants to shore up its energy supply, with Victoria and New South Wales also facing possible gas shortages as early as winter 2026, unless we, a gas-rich country, import more gas. Victoria, of course, plenty of gas in the ground. We just don't have a government that allows us to get it out.
Well, Peter, none of those 4 or 5 items sound like a $275 reduction to me. Not one of them. And guess what? It impacts directly our food supply into Australia and what things cost. And once again, it will make international companies more competitive. If I remember correctly, in the US, their gas price is around $3 a gigajoule. I mean, that's US dollars, obviously. And here I'm hearing quotes in Australian dollars above 20 on the spot market for our manufacturers. It is a ludicrous position to find ourselves in. It is all off the back of Labor policies. And now you're looking at having to start diesel generators in South Australia to keep the lights on. And these are big ones. They're not reciprocating engines. These are like a gas turbine themselves. So once again, across the board, state, federal Labor governments, it is their policies that are driving the Australian people to the wall on cost of living. We will have less manufacturers, not more, under this Labor government.
More rights to work from home, an election issue. I can't believe you could be that lucky, surely.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, this is just that another hangover from the COVID period that seems to not want to go away, this work for home scenario. Ultimately, this has really got to come to an end, I think. I mean, people were locked in their homes, sure, but we've now got central business districts that are crying out for people to come back to the office. And I mean, look, where does the ACTU go when it has prosecuted every legitimate argument, perhaps twice over? Well, it looks to work from home because everyone wants to work in their pajamas. It's got to end. I mean, businesses have a right to have people in their offices. Every business that I speak to that can have people working from home wishes they had less. And I think it's, I mean, I very happily tackle that one in the lead up to an election. You're quite right about that.
Keith, I brought a story to my viewers last week about a convicted murderer in Victoria who'd been approved to get IVF treatment. Well, the government's been weak. Jacinta Allen sort of wringing her hands about it, says she won't discuss personal circumstances. But all the public hospitals that to have IVF services, as well as the state's major IVF clinics, they are saying they will not treat this woman. So leadership from the clinics and not the Premier.
Well, Peter, I know this is a desperately personal issue for you, and I know your history. But if you're in jail, there's a reason for that. You are paying the penalty for something that you've done in your former life, and this is one of those penalties. I think people in Victoria would be horrified as to what you can get access to as a jail inmate. The idea is that you're supposed to have a penalty because of the things that you've done, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. But it's another reason the Victorian government is tanking, not just on the economy, which is an absolute disaster. Here's another reason.
You're not wrong. I think parenthood is a responsibility, not just a right. In this case, she loses her rights. Thank you both. See you.
Shall we? Action on World Health has commissioned the Bell Review, and they're launching that today.
It's made up of 9 experts who are recommending proposals to either radically reform or replace the World Health Organisation.
And among those pushing for the changes is the leader of Reform UK, Nigel Farage. And a very good morning to you, Nigel. We've spoken about the problems within the World Health Organisation with you before, but for anyone that's not familiar with it or up to date, just bring us up to speed with what it is that is irritating you about the WHO.
Well, it's a government body under the United Nations. The British government's just agreed in the last 2 weeks to give it a further £310 million of taxpayers' money. Their performance during the pandemic was catastrophic. They insisted that the pandemic had come through the wet markets in China, not the fact that it was a leak from a lab in Wuhan. And they're a very heavily Chinese-influenced organisation. Now they've gone further, and on the table they've got something called the Pandemic Treaty, which, when it goes through in a year's time, will mean they can tell us that we have to lock down. They can tell us we have to have vaccine mandates. I mean, it's incredible that the Labour government is even considering signing up to this, given what a failure the organisation has been, and that would be a total loss of sovereignty over health issues. So yes, I've been campaigning against this for some time. It's not just us, though, because the incoming Trump administration also is deeply sceptical about the World Health Organization, the amount of power it wants, the bad decisions it takes, and the level of Chinese influence over it. So, yes, as you said in your intro, we're launching the Bell Review. Dr. David Bell, somebody who's worked at the WHO, along with 8 other senior medics, will produce a report suggesting how we can reform this organisation to make it one where governments cooperate as opposed to giving away power. And we want this to be seriously reformed, or we have to leave it and set something else up.
The World Health Organization have been quite adamant that this pandemic treaty is about cooperation, not about ceding power. They've accused you of spreading misinformation and using this as what they call, and I quote, a populist wedge issue. They deny that lockdown mandates are part of the deal, and they say any claims that countries would be required to give away 20% of their vaccines, they say, are simply not true.
Well, it's absolutely explicit in their proposed treaty. They couldn't get it through this year, but they're determined to bring it back next year. It's the same loss of sovereignty we had as members of the European Union. It's a Brexit-style argument, but this time it's around health. And frankly, you know, when you look at the pandemic and the 3 major lockdowns we had in our country, I think they proved to be, frankly, the worst peacetime decisions ever taken by a British government. No one's been properly held to account for the damage it's done to our young people, our old people, our health service. And the idea that a remote group of people, unaccountable to anybody, could lock us down in the future is just unacceptable and should be stopped. And yet, you know, when Labour are challenged, the government are challenged in the Commons, they deny the facts. They're there, they're real, they're clear. We're serious about this campaign, and I promise you, when I look at who Donald Trump has appointed to be his health supremos, they share the same skepticism as me. So if ever there was a moment to reform this organisation, with Trump coming in a few weeks' time,
It's shocking how much of the equipment we've used for decades contains forever chemicals. This is the first innovation of
it's now.
Yeah, it seems quite poetic, the full circle the US has had with regards to their health leaders. You had Jay Bhattacharya, who's the head of the NIH, which was Anthony Fauci's job. And we all remember him during COVID, and of course RFK Jr. as well. In a reformed WHO, Nigel, where would the funding come from? Because you've expressed concerns about it coming from China. Bill Gates, of course, is a massive influence as well. Yeah. Where would funding from a reformed organisation come from?
Well, I think if we reformed it, then the Trump administration would happily play a role. We would happily play a role, as opposed to just giving away hundreds of millions with no questions asked. No, I mean, look, the argument that international cooperation is always a good argument. But the trouble is, all these globalist organisations, whether it's the EU, the UN, the WHO, they always use these situations to take power upon themselves. And that's what we've got to stop. And it's really a closed shop. This guy, Tedros, has been running it for years, despite having no medical history at all. His own sister is in a highly paid job. I mean, talk about jobs for the boys. No, this organisation doesn't work. It failed during the pandemic in every single way. It covered up to protect China, and we should not be giving our hard-earned money to an organisation that wants to take our sovereignty.
Nigel, can I ask you, whilst we've got you and talking about hundreds of millions of, whether it's dollars or pounds, these rumours, come on, you know I have to ask you, your pal Elon Musk that you spent election night with is rumoured to be about to donate $100 million US, I think that's 78 million pounds, in a big, and I quote, FU to Starmer. Is this true? Is it going to happen?
I have absolutely no idea where this story comes from. It was a Sunday Times journalist that rang me on Saturday with it. I have literally no idea about this at all. What I do know is that Elon Musk is very supportive of me, what I'm trying to do, and he thinks that if reform do well in the UK, we can bring about the same kind of change that he intends to do with Donald Trump in America. All of that is true. Yes, he is very supportive, but honestly, this idea of huge sums of money, well, let's put it like this. It hasn't been discussed with me.
Hasn't been discussed with you, but it's not a no. What about the fact that actually it's illegal for foreign activists to get involved in British politics, and it would have to be through his British arm of Twitter? Do you worry about the optics of that, or are you comfortable with that if this does prove to be true?
Look, I'm not giving you a yes or a no. I don't know. I suspect this is not true. Legally, companies operating in the UK can give money to UK political parties, but I think we're a very long way away from that. Look, if it did happen, well, that'd be great. But I think it's one of those, really very good, gossipy Sunday newspaper things. Let's see, but I rather doubt it.
Nigel, can I ask you about Hunter Biden? Joe Biden has said he will pardon him. That's despite, of course, denying he'd ever do such a thing earlier this year, I think on multiple occasions. Do you think Joe Biden got a whiff that maybe the incoming Trump administration was going to be going after Hunter and indeed other adversaries?
I suspect that Trump will be far less vengeful than the Democrats have been against him. It's just not his nature. He wants to get on and do stuff and reform.
Earlier this year, I think on multiple occasions. Do you think Joe Biden got a whiff that maybe the incoming Trump administration was going to be going after Hunter and indeed other adversaries?
I suspect that Trump will be far less vengeful than the Democrats have been against him. It's just not his nature. He wants to get on and do stuff and reform and change America. But the idea that the pardon covers everything and anything that Hunter Biden has done over the course of the last 11 years, I think is truly extraordinary. And for Joe Biden to say that the prosecutions against Hunter were politically motivated, I mean, my goodness me, talk about pot capital, given what they put Trump through over the course of the last year or so. Now, this is the end, a dying Democrat regime, and Hunter gets away with it. Nothing in America surprises me. Let's just hope that Trump reforms. I'm going to keep using that word because it's vital. Let's hope Trump does attempt to reform the American judicial system, because it's no longer fit for purpose.
Okay, Nigel, thanks very much for your company this morning. Appreciate it.